Do you want to learn how to create and use a counter cache? Then stick around to find out how. I'm Thomas with Brain Trust Digital. I'm a full-stack web developer obsessed with learning. If you're interested in learning about full-stack web development, please consider subscribing below. I have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and I'm gonna need a lot of help. So if you consider sharing this with somebody who you think may be interested in this type of content, I would really appreciate it. In this AWS Rails tutorial, we're gonna walk through how to add a counter cache to your Ruby on Rails application. In a previous tutorial, we added categories and then set up a relationship with our video model. So categories can have many videos and videos can have many categories. On our videos, we display the category below. We'd like to add a number there, the count of videos associated with a particular category. This simple addition can be very taxing on your database. This is an N+1 problem, meaning it adds an additional SQL request for every single category you display on that page. The request has to go and count the amount of videos associated with that category. While we only have a very small application, if you had a large application, this would magnify the problem. Don't worry, we'll cover everything in the video from generating the migration to create the counter cache column, associating it with the relationships, populating legacy data, and finally, updating the views and deploying. So with that being said, I'll catch you in the tutorial covering how to create a counter cache for your application. As you can see, we have our application running locally. In a previous tutorial, we added tags to our videos. So below the video title, you can see this video has some tags: AWS, S3, Certificate Manager, SSL, and CloudFront. If you click on a tag, it'll take you to that category page and list all of the other videos that are associated with that particular category. So if we go back now to the video, on the videos page, I thought it might be nice to list the amount of videos per category as part of the link. So for example, if we had 10 videos in the AWS category, we'd just say AWS and then in parentheses a 10 afterwards. So you can just start to see how many videos we have on a per category basis. This is also really nice as it will demonstrate for us the benefits of a counter cache. So to get started, we're gonna flip over to the console and create a new Get branch. To do so, you're going to type get checkout-b. In my case, I'm going to call this branch counter cache. Feel free to name your branch whatever you'd like. First, I'm going to demonstrate what the problem is, and then we can use counter cache to solve it. To do so, we're going to open up our views. In our views for the video show page, where we're displaying our video with the categories underneath, you can see that we're using the Rails shorthand to list out all of the video categories. Rails convention tells us that this categories collection will be looped over, and Rails will assume that there's a partial underscore category in the categories view folder. So we're going to open up categories and then the underscore category.html.erb file. In this file, we're just going to add some parentheses. Then we will list the category.videos.count. This is going to give us the number of videos associated with this particular category. So we can go ahead and save that, flip back over to the browser, and refresh. As you can see, just like we'd expect, we get the number of videos associated with each category. The problem lies when you switch back over to the console and look at the tab that we have running the Rails server. The current method of chaining categories.videos.count forces Rails to make a query on a per category basis to count all of the videos associated. It's not a huge issue since we have a tiny little website with only a few categories and videos, so we're only going to ever see minor issues in our case, but the more data you have, the more impactful this type of change will be. Here you can see the select count star from videos for the first category, then the second, and so on. What we'd like to do is remove all of these additional queries, but still maintain the front end visual of having a count on the category. Here's where a counter cache comes into play. Counter caching is a technique where we add a column to the database to keep track of this count for us. This allows us to avoid the additional database queries on a per category basis just to get the count. Once we have the database set up, the next problem you need to tackle is how do we keep this in line? That is, how do we keep this count accurate with the number of videos associated with a particular category? Here's the nice part. You don't really have to worry about that. Rails has you covered. I'll show you how. There are three main pieces to tackle when enabling a counter cache. The first is the database migration. The second being to populate the data with the current state. And finally, the third would be to update our views to use this new database column. So let's go ahead and create our database migration now. We're going to switch back over to our other tab in the terminal. We're going to run a Rails command to create a new migration. Rails G migration, add videos count to categories. The column name is going to be videos_count, and it's going to be of type integer. We can switch back over to Sublime Text to look at the migration before running it. Here you can see, just as we'd expect, we're adding a column to the categories table. The column name is videos count, and it is of type integer. One thing we want to add before running is default this to 0. Once complete, we can go ahead and save, and then flip back over to the terminal to run the migration. We do so with Rails DB migrate. Now that we've got our database in line, let's go ahead and update the relationship so Rails knows it's going to have to keep track of this counter cache for us. So we're going to flip back over to Sublime Text. We're going to open the join model of our categories video. Here in app models categories video.rb, we have our has many through join model. If you need help creating a join model similar to this, I have this covered in a previous tutorial that I'll link in the card as well as the description below. In our case, we have one simple change. We're going to pass the counter cache key with a symbol of videos_count, which is identical to our database column name. Then we're going to go ahead and save. Now that we have our database in line and our relationships set up correctly, so Rails knows to keep track of this counter cache and increment or decrement for us, the next thing we need to do is populate our data. This step is optional. If this is a brand new join model that you are adding a counter cache to, and there is no related data currently in that join model, then you're good to go. If, like my case, you have a lot of data, meaning a lot of associated categories and videos, then you're going to have to populate that videos count column to make sure it's in line. Then moving forward, as we add or remove videos from a category, Rails will automatically increment or decrement the count for us. Typically, you'll see this populating data task completed in a Rails migration. And while we're going to use a Rails migration, I want to actually write the code in a new service. I thought this would be a nice time to talk about services as we haven't discussed them previously. The basic premise behind services are that they do one thing and do it really well. There's no model backend behind it. These aren't appropriate to put in the models folder as they're just plain old Ruby objects. Many people have different names. In our case, I just call them services and I make a folder in my app folder called services to house them. In our app folder, we're going to go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to name it services. Then inside here, we're going to create our new service. So we'll create a new file. I'm going to save this file, and we're going to call it count resetter. In our count resetter, I'm going to go ahead and paste the code, and we can walk through it. There's a couple of things to note about a service object. First, they're just plain old Ruby objects. As you can see, this is a Ruby class with an initialize method. So we can call countResetter.new. Next, it's important that service objects just do one thing and do it well. I typically throw this one thing in a run method. Within the run method, you can see the code specific to our needs. In this case, this service is meant to reset our counter cache. So here it is looping through all the categories and calling the reset counters class method on a category by category basis, and then passing in the relationship to count, in our case, videos. I find services very useful, and while typically people would just write this inner run code in a database migration, I thought it might be interesting to see something a little different. And I had a reason behind that you'll see in a minute. Before we go on, one more quick note. As you saw, we added the services folder and then added our count resetter in that folder. If we flip back over to our terminal and open a Rails console, then we attempt to interact with this object. Occasionally, you can get a class not found. In my case, it appears this worked, but if you do get this class not found error, you can just run spring stop. This will ensure all the folders in app get loaded, specifically your new services folder, which will then give Rails access to the new class, count resetter. I just wanted to point that out as one place if you've never created services, you may not know that that could occur. Okay, so now let's create our database migration. We will create our migration like so. In this case, we're going to run Rails G migration, populate counter cache is what we're going to call this migration. Let's go ahead and open that migration up and fill in the code we need. Since we didn't pass anything in as part of our generate command, we just have this default def change method. In here, you could try to check the direction and then only write code for the up, or instead you could replace this like we're going to with an up and down direction because we only want to write code on up. Now that we're only writing our code on up, you can see the code that we're going to run. We're going to call our new count resetter service, instantiate a new version, and then call the run method. Let's go ahead and save this. And as you can see, when we instantiate a new version and run the run method, it'll just reset our counters for our category videos. Now we can flip back over to the terminal and go ahead and run our migration. We can do so using Rails db:/migrate. Okay, so it looks like everything worked, but let's go ahead and jump into the console real quick to verify. To do so, we're going to run Rails C. Now that our console has loaded, we could query our category model and make sure that our new counter cache field has been populated. So if we say category.all, or maybe a better way to read this would be category.pluck, and then we'll pass in the fields we'd like to see. So in this case, we're going to spit out the name of the category, and we'll also spit out the videos count. You have to actually spell category correctly for this to work. And there you go. You can see in this case, we have the AWS Rails category tagged with 10 videos in the counter cache column, Ruby on Rails with 7, and so on. Categories without any videos will default to 0 per the default we set in the database. So now we have our database columns in place. We have our current data migrated. If we flip back over to the front end real quick and make a few changes, we can test to confirm that Rails is in fact keeping this data in line for us. So in this case, even though this video has nothing to do with database management, I'm going to go ahead and tag this. When looking at the console, the database category has 0 videos associated with it. Let's go ahead and update this video, flip back over to the console. We can run the same query. And this time, if we've done everything correctly, the database category now displays 1 for the videos count counter cached column. Awesome. So this proves Rails is actually tracking, incrementing this field for us. Let's go ahead and make sure that it also decrements. To do so, all you need to do is load back in to the browser, click edit, and then we'll go ahead and remove this. Once we update the video, we can flip back over to the terminal and then again run the exact same query. As you can see, the database category once again has 0 listed for the column. So that verifies that Rails is in fact incrementing and decrementing this as items change. So the next thing we need to do is actually use this field in our views. If you flip over to the tab running our Rails server, and then we hit Command K on a Mac to clear the server logs, then flip back over to the browser and refresh the page. If we flip back over to the terminal now and look at the logs, you can still see these select star from videos. This is the query counting the videos. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought we just enabled the counter cache. Well, we did, we have to now use that. So in our views, we need to go ahead and update our underscore category.html.erb view. Here, instead of calling it categories.videos.count, we're going to change this to categories.videos_count. the new cached column. Let's go ahead and save this. I'll keep the past logs, flip back over to the browser and refresh the screen one more time. This way you can compare the previous logs versus the new logs. Here you can see the new logs, and you'll notice the distinct absence of all of the additional selects from the previous request. As you can see, we're now using our counter cached column, which just eliminates all these additional queries. Now I know it's just a few milliseconds here and there, but if you had a really large application with hundreds of videos and categories, this would make a huge difference. You can also see we're saving a lot of memory in terms of reduced allocations, and we're also spending a lot less time in active record as a result. You always want to make sure to validate and measure your changes so you're not making premature optimizations that don't really make sense. One thing you may be wondering, why create a whole separate service instead of just pasting this code inside the up method of our migration? Part of the reason is because I haven't covered services previously, and I think that might be good to provide some content around them. It's a very useful technique, but also the potential to remove duplication. The code contained in the up method we may need to run if for some reason our database ever comes out of line. Because of its location inside a migration, once that data has been migrated upon our deploy to production, we can't easily force that migration to run again, and you wouldn't want to in your production database. Instead, pulling this code out into a service, we can use the code in our migration as well as creating a task running the same code so that we can immediately force this to run again via a task if necessary. So to do so, I'm just pasting in the code here. I'm calling it, the description there is populate categories counter cache. The task name itself is just going to be categories counter cache. That's the command I'll run via Rails. If I ever happen to need to run this task, you can see the code the task runs is just the same as the migration. But now I have the ability to have this data immediately in line as part of the deployment, since Capistrano will automatically check if there are new migrations and then run them if necessary, as well as the ability future forward to explicitly call or explicitly reset these counters if for some reason I may need to. So while this is a bit extra and a little bit of overkill because you probably won't ever need to run this, it's just a nice process to have in place and something that I thought could be nice to show depending on your use case. So now that we have our migration in place, we've populated our legacy data, we've confirmed that Rails is in fact managing our increments and decrements moving forward, and we've got our extra task in place just in case on the off chance something came out of line, we could immediately run this and get back into the proper state. The next thing we need to do is go ahead and deploy. I'm gonna flip back over to the other terminal tab. We're gonna break out of this console now that we've confirmed everything's working like we expect. We're gonna go ahead and clear the screen and run get status. Here you can see all the code we've updated. Let's go ahead and add that to Git with git add dot. Then we will commit our code. Then we will commit our code with a message. Next, we will push our branch up to our external repository. In this case, we use GitHub. Typically at this point, as always, if you are working in a team, you would go ahead and reach out to your teammate. You'd create a pull request and then have your teammate review that code. Since Bear is currently napping on the couch, as the good dog that he is, we're just gonna go ahead and merge this for ourselves. To do so, we're gonna run get checkout master to get back to our main branch. Then run get merge and the name of our branch. In this case, it's counter cache. Finally, we'll run get push to push this new merged branch up to our remote main branch. Once that's complete, we can finally deploy. If you need help with Git or GitHub, I'll link the tutorial covering those topics in the card as well as the description below. To deploy, we're gonna run bundle exec cap production deploy. As you can see, our deployment has finished. And at the tail end here, you can see that Capistrano picked up we added 2 migrations and has gone ahead and run those in production. The first of which being adding the column for our counter cache, the second of which being running our service, which populated the previous data so our counter cache columns were in line for Rails to then maintain moving forward. So let's go ahead and flip back over to the browser and ensure everything is acting as we expect in production as well. Here on our production website, if we go ahead and click the videos link and then select a video, we scroll down, you can see we now have the video column outputting. If you'd like to confirm further, we could SSH into the production box and then tail the logs. If you need help setting up SSH keys, I have a tutorial covering that entire topic that I'll link in the card as well as the description. Now let's cd into our project and the current folder, and then we'll go ahead and tail the logs. We'll do so with tail-f log production.log. This will stream the logs to this console as we load pages, shifting our terminal off to one side and our browser off to another. Now if we click in the terminal window, hit Command K to clear the screen, and then refresh the page, we'll be able to see the logs from this page request as they stream in on the production server. I'll go ahead and maximize the logs for easier view. While these logs look ever so slightly different from the logs you'd see in your local terminal, it's pretty clear to see that our counter cache is working. There's no extra queries running that count star command to be able to calculate our video count. So I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider sharing with a friend who you think may be interested in this type of content. Also, please don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Finally, if you need more help, please submit questions or requests in the comment section below. And with that, I'll catch you in the next AWS Rails tutorial.